Hello, welcome to the October 24th, 2023 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a livestream before, how it works is you could ask questions in the live chat field or send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could specify which level of Cubase that you're running, whether it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro. Also, if you could let us know which version number, so if it's version 11 or 12, and which operating system, that information is helpful. When asking questions, realize that as questions are kind of asked in real time, my ability to answer them in a real-time manner may soon be eclipsed, but we will go through all the questions chronologically. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if you want to just wait, you don't have to ask the same question repeatedly over and over again. So that just speeds up the whole process. We should have an index of all the topics that are discussed in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. So you could see that several hours after the live stream. I basically will go back and rewatch the live stream and type up all the questions. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. I also have a document, a Word document that I could share with the over 28,000 topics that we've covered in live streams. So if you wanted to reach out to clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'm happy to share that particular file. I believe it's also updated in the Cubase Nation Discord. But with the cubaseindex.com, we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating the wonderful website with that. And if you wanted to download a document, that's also available in the Cubase Nation Discord. And if you're not familiar with the Cubase Nation Discord, Jazz Dude does a lot of effort to make that a really compelling place to be for finding out relevant information for the Steinberg community. So we'll give a special thanks to him. We also have two people that serve as moderators. And we want to give a special thanks to Jazz Dude and Agent K for their efforts. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the U.S. distributor of Steinberg products. And I'm presenting from outside Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching live, please feel free to introduce yourself, or even if you're watching afterwards, and tell us who you are and where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. Okay. So we see Angeli Lucis. Hi there. Is it possible to drag and drop a drum sample and put it into sampler tracks so that it works like FL Splicer? So I'm not familiar with FL Splicer, but I think I may have an idea what it's doing. So let's say if we wanted to go to our sampler track here, we could drag in any of the samples. So I'm just going to drag in a particular drum loop. And then if we go to the slice category, at this point we could choose to activate slices. And now that we've activated the slices, it's going to automatically allow us to trigger the particular slices just that easily. So if we wanted to come over, I'll just make this a little louder so we could hear it better. So whether it's if you're doing vocal chops or and once you've created the slices, and you could do the slices based on transient, based on the grid. So we say, okay, I want my to be based upon the grid. We could just have that set up, or we could say, okay, transient plus grid, or we want it to be manually. So at this point, we'll see this little Midi icon appear, and then we could drag and drop the events to the sampler track. And as we look at it, this would basically trigger each of the different notes of the slice for the sampler. So let me know if that's kind of what you're looking to do, but just drag it in, create this, click on the slice tab, activate it, and then you could kind of slice and chop your samples directly inside Cubase. And it's not only for drums, for vocals. I know a lot of people just record like vocal vamps when people are trying ideas, and then be able to kind of put together different ideas quickly using the sampler track with the slicing. All right, so we see Peter from Montreal. We have David M checking in from Liverpool. We see Jazz Dude. We see Stefan from Sweden. We see Jammin' and Cannon joining us again. Great to have you on. We have John Costigan, loyal attendee from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have Jan from Cubase Index. We have Uno Memento from Finland, who's on the road and mobile, so we won't be able to watch the whole live stream, but he's hit the like button. So, and if you do learn a new tip or trick, make sure that you do hit the like button. All right, so we have a question from Dallas LaRue from Las Vegas. And my chat field just jumped. Dallas LaRue's question: what is the SMPTE generator, and what is pink noise, and can you record pink noise? So the SMPTE generator is a timecode plugin. So it used to be that when we would go to, in the old days when we had analog tape machines, people would often stripe a timecode on the last track, often track 24 or track 16, the last track on the deck with timecode, and then you could synchronize other tape machines to it or synchronize sequencers. So this was kind of like a timecode reference that other elements in Recording Studio could synchronize to. So in the old days, it would be, you would have the timecode recorded to the tape, and that kind of gave the position of hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. And then the sequencer would chase to the tape. So you hit play and tape, then the sequencer would follow the tape. Most of the time people, let me clear my throat. Most of the time now people aren't synchronizing to analog tape machines. But if we needed to generate timecode, and where this comes in handy, a lot of times large format consoles like an SSL, that has automation built into the console. Those automation points are, come in at specific timecode points. So what we could do in Cubase, instead of having Cubase, and being that Cubase is a digital source, it often needs very steady clocks. And if we have wow and flutter in an analog device, like a tape machine, where the tape is speeding up and slowing down, that could affect the time code, and that time code could prevent proper synchronization. So sometimes if a tape machine isn't aligned correctly, as you play, some of the tracks may speed up and slow down slightly, and that could mess up the time code and the sync. So what we could do, instead of having Cubase kind of follow the master time code or the primary time code, we could now come over here and just as an insert, and this is kind of what SMPTE timecode sounds like. I'll just make sure the volume is turned down here. We could just enable a plugin under tools, and when we go to our SMPTE generator, as we play, this is kind of what SMPTE timecode is. So we can see our, we see hours, minutes, seconds, frames, and then you could have subframes. So what this would allow you to do is, if we were synchronizing our Cubase project with automation on a console, we could load this on an audio track, take that to a separate audio output on our audio interface, feed that into the console, and then the console will kind of follow it, and with its automation will follow the timing generated by Cubase, which will be a much more accurate source since there is no wow and flutter with the digital audio. So you could think of it as kind of a master timecode source, not as often used, but if you were years ago, if you were composing to video on a video deck, synchronizing your sequencer to an analog to an analog tape deck or ADATs, D88s, you would use Timecode to do that. Now, there's also other tools, and there's a question, what about the pink noise generator? And what is pink noise, and can you record pink noise? So pink noise is going to be just a test tone. So when we come over, we can say, okay, let's come over to pink noise. I think white noise is with all of the frequencies that are within the human range. Brown noise may be all frequencies together, and pink noise I think might be just a weighting of the noise. So it's just a noise generator. So when we look at this and we go to we'll go to inserts, and we'll go to supervision. We could kind of see the particular, we'll go now to our spectrum bar. We could see kind of the frequency. So pink noise looks like it's more weighted to the low frequencies and might be a slight decrease. But so if you wanted to record it, you could just simply put on an input source and record it. Most people tend not to record brown noise or pink noise. Some people may open it up with like a kick sample as a trigger to kind of, as a sound design element. But those are some of the uses of this empty timecode generator and pink noise. All right, so we see Value checking in from Vienna. Thanks for joining us. All right, we see Pete Van Blokland checking in. I believe he's in the Netherlands. Okay, Value says got to learn a lot today, he hopes. All right, and we have Nanook Brazzers also checking in from Netherlands. We see Jan from Cubase Index. All right, and we have Henrik joining us. All right, so we see from Value, I feel my knowledge has doubled in the last months thanks to Greg for this regular stream. So nice. Well, that's great, and I always like to learn new things as well. All right, and we have Rob from Tarpon Springs just saying, thanks, Greg, for your knowledge in these hangouts. Always wonderful to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right, and we have someone from Thailand. Thanks for joining us. It's very early in the middle of the night there, so thanks for joining the live stream. All right, and we have Ad Plus Jerome from Benin Republic. Thanks for being on. It's great to see Martin from Germany again. Okay, so we see from Value feature request. Make the arranger track able just to drag and drop parts around, work around with a folder, but it'd be really nice, just saying. All right, so let's just say if we have an arranger track, we'll just add it here. So, if you have the arranger events, you can just drag them around like so. But let me know if it's something else that you want to do specifically for misunderstanding Value. All right, so we have Lloyd Mitchell joining us from Mississippi. Thanks for being on the live stream today. Always great to see Captain Energy Music from Pennsylvania. All right, so we have Sing It Slow, Mop Man from Maryland is back. All right, great to have you back on the live stream. All right, we have Dr. Amin checking in from Jordan. All right, great to see Tommy C. All right, Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas is on, which probably means that we will begin the ice cream distribution. Great. Okay, so we see from Hans Van Hagen. I have a visual handicap. I can see very clear, but only one half, so I can't read easily. And this is not a problem except for how Steinberg start with license system. I hope I could still use Cubase. So I know, I think once you have the license system set up, once you have the activation manager, I don't think you should have any problems. But like if you start a new project, I'm not sure if maybe you're talking about the hub. If this is connected, but I know that we do have, I know several blind users that I help, and they don't seem to have a problem working with their Cubase. But there's, once you're in your Steinberg activation manager, let me know if that's a particular problem. But once you have it activated once, then you don't really have to do it again. Okay, so we see Spike Williams checking in from Rhonda Wales. Okay, David M asks, I love you could drag the tiny white box to increase or decrease the volume of an audio part in a track. Can you do anything similar in the MIDI part of a track? Thanks. So, with MIDI data, we're not really, because it's not really like an event necessarily, because the MIDI, so there isn't an equivalent for this. And I think what David's referring to is like with audio, we could adjust clip gain and we're adjusting the dB values, but with MIDI, we don't really have a particular dB value because technically MIDI doesn't have a volume. But if you are just kind of working, with your MIDI CCs, you can just kind of, draw in your CC data. And if you, within the editor, if you wanted to edit the MIDI CC data, you could, select all of the CCs and bring them up or down. So, but there isn't like an object-based mode because MIDI technically itself isn't a sound, and we don't necessarily, since it is a MIDI note on-off message, you could have MIDI CCs for volume, but it is different than how audio, just the nature of the beast of how it is a different medium than audio itself. But I'll pass it along as perhaps a future request that, people like that. But you could always, just come over here and adjust your volume of MIDI stuff as well. All right, so we have Zari's official just saying hi from the UK, and we have Nick Mandrick saying hi from Toronto. Thanks for being online. All right, we have Jam Tracks Reunion just checking in from Seattle. Okay, so Vishnu from India has a question. How can we work with auto fades in audio, like a short or something? I know there's an auto fade window. All right, so when we come over here, we could see, what our auto fades are going to be kind of set up for is, let's say, a lot of times we have edits where we could snap to zero crossing. So let's say I take my snap off and we're starting. We have an audio edit right here on this particular drum loop. Or let's see if we can, we'll do it on another event where maybe more visually obvious. Okay, so let's say we have our test tone here. All right, and when we zoom in, I'm going to just come over here and make some cuts. All right, so let's say I am going to cut this portion out. Okay, so now when we listen to this test tone, we may just hear like a little pop or click when it kind of comes back in. Let me just... So like when we're kind of starting, you may just like, as we start and stop, you may hear a little pop or click. So if we wanted to apply the crossfade, we could have the auto fade setting. So I'm going to turn this off currently. And let's listen to our test tone. So we hear that kind of a little pop at the end because we've made our edit kind of within, not at the zero crossing. So right as the audio is not at the zero crossing point. So when we do this, we hear the little pop and click. But what we could do is now activate auto fades. And once we activate auto fades, this will apply a 10 millisecond fade in, fade out at the end of the events, so that you don't hear that pop or click. We don't see it visually, but it's applied to the playback on file so that you don't have to necessarily go in and do short crossfades to get rid of little pops and clicks at the beginning of edits if you had to do edits not based upon the zero crossing point. So that's what this auto fade. So you don't see it. You can't really edit the fades other than going to the fade settings and choosing what type of fade. If you wanted a logarithmic or sinusoid crossfade or linear, you can have that set there. But those auto fade settings will automatically take place so that you don't have to do physical edits. So with it off, we'll listen to it. So I'll just turn it off. And we hear, and now with them enabled, we could listen to it and we won't have the clicks at the end and beginning of the segments. Just like that. So that's the intention of the auto fades. So you can't edit them. If you needed to do fades, we could come over here, select, and you could manually do fades. But, this is so that we don't have to do like 100 little crossfades depending upon the particular audio edit. It's great to have you back on the Livestream, Vishnu. Thanks for the question. All right, we see value is sending strudel from Austria to Texas for Michael Teams. All right, so we have El Pese or El Pes from South Africa. Thanks for being on. All right, so Ted Springman says, Cubase converts a singer's notes to Midi, but does the program know what Midi note to assign a snare drum? So often when we're dealing with snare drums, so there's two ways of approaching this. So let's say if we wanted to like replace snare drums, so let's say we look at my snare drum track here. All right, and I'm going to go to Vary Audio. And we could see that there are, when we look at it, we can see that the pitch of the snare drum, as we listen to it here, so often we could see kind of what the pitch of the snare drum is, but if you wanted to assign it to a MIDI note, probably Vary Audio is not the best way of doing that. And what we could do is once we're here, go to hit points. And as we come over here to our hit points, we want to edit the hit points. We'll kind of adjust our threshold so it's only going to be snares. And when we go to the Create tab, we'll see Create MIDI. And then if we want to automatically assign this, we'll say Create MIDI Notes. And here we could manually assign the particular pitch to trigger the sample, because the sample that the MIDI note is being fired from and being triggered from is not going to be related to the actual pitch. So once you do by hit points, you could just choose the MIDI note there and know what MIDI note your particular instrument needs to for a kick or snare and enter that in, and then that's the MIDI note that will be created. All right, so we see Jam Tracks Reunion. Hey Greg, is there a way in Cubase 12 Pro to disable all plugins either per channel or per entire mixer? I believe Control H will bypass all mixer plugins, but I need to disable them. So I think the disabled is going to actually be more an individual action. So let me just change that. Sorry, annoying Mac OS thing. So if we add let me just add a track preset here. Okay, so we'll just add an audio track here with some plugins. Okay. All right, so I think that when you come over here, we could say, so let's go to like the mixer view, and let's come over to so I want to say that we could do it kind of all right, so let me just see if I get my modifier key. Trying to remember what the okay, so bypass is just the alter option key. Now let me just see. All right, I'm just going to put multi-band on just, and we could check because this will have more latency. So I don't know of a way if I remember, so let me just watching the latencies to see if it's bypassed or latent. So I come here, we see that we had the latency here, so if we bypass it, the latency is still there, being that the latency is compensated for. And then just trying to remember the okay. And I'll just put 2 in and see if we could do it a full channel. So I think that to bypass needs to be done individually. So we turn it off, we still see the latency. So it's still taking time, and I'm just holding down the Alt or Option key to bypass each one. I'll try another modifier key here. But as you do that, it has to... Yes, I think the bypass is going to be individually done. But let me just... see if there's a secret key combination, but I think it's going to be individually done and not in a group. I'll check just to make sure. If there is, I don't think it could be done in a project logical editor, but we'll take a look just to see. Yeah, so we could bypass it here, but not disable. So I think the individual plugins would have to be disabled one at a time. So. All right, so we see, hi Greg, when making a beat, can I somehow play a loop for the writer to listen to and write while continue working on the same beat in the same project and update periodically the loop for listening? So if you want it to be kind of like, I want to write the song with a basic beat, and then you like have the song continue to play on, we'll show you how to do that. Let's see, I may have it. So let me know if this is kind of what you want to do. I'll show it. All right, so let's say I have like maybe an idea that that's developed, and I want to just work on the drum beat with it. So what I could do is I'm going to come over here, and we could set up what we call a, if you go to settings, you may have to activate something that's called the independent track loop, and that's what this icon is here. You may have to turn that on, and then once we have this done, and I could have this song continue to play. So I'll turn off my solo here. So my song can continue to play while I'm working on maybe building a loop, a beat here. So just say, while this editor window, this part is basically playing one measure over and over again while this song continues to play forever. So if you wanted to have kind of like one part that repeats independently of the others, just open the editor and then you could do an independent track loop. And then if you needed to, once you close the editor, you say, okay, this is the part I want as the basis. At that point, you could just come right here to the center edge and just drag it over and make copies. So let me know if that makes sense for you, Balsa. Okay, so Botman says, hi Greg, any updates to when the next version of Cubase will be available? So, there is kind of a unexpected business situation that arose with our online shop provider that had stopped a lot of distribution of software as the online shop provider went into insolvency. So as of today, there's kind of a soft promotion going on to test the new online shop. And I think once that is kind of fully vetted and tested, that we may see new versions, but there's a lot of exciting things coming. But I can't really say much more than that, unfortunately. All right, so we see Michael Teams is busy with the ice cream distribution, which everyone loves. Okay, so we see from Home Studio World, hi Greg, say I have my own Rhythmic arpeggio as Midi. How can I drag it to the Apache SX to follow exactly the rhythmic sequence as it is in my Midi? Thanks a lot. Okay, so let's jump back here. Okay, so let's say I wanted to have my own kind of synth bass part here. So there's a couple ways to approach this. One is, okay, I want to, I'll just look at this in the lower editor here. All right, so say, okay, so let's say I'll just quantize these here. Okay, so let's say this is my event. Okay, so let's say this is my arpeggio that I want to do. And I'll just take this. And let's get to the Apache SX. So now we go to sequence. And so we have a half note, and I just drag it right here. So now as I So now I'm just playing the chord. So I'll come over here. Let's open up the virtual keyboard. So I'm just going to play a chord. And it's now mimicking the rhythm. So if I wanted to change the rhythm here, so let's say, okay, I wanted this to be So again, if I have my rhythm of something like this, all you had to do is just kind of drag that event into the sequence. So that would be all you'd have to do with that. So that way it could have your own rhythmic basis as the for the Apache SX to follow, and that would be all you'd have to do. So once you have this open, drag the event, and you'll see just a sequence right there. Drag it, and you could just drop the MIDI sequence, and that's now the rhythmic basis for that. All right, so we see Michael Teams is granted Jan 1 gallon of strawberry swirl ice cream. Tommy C is just saying, old days with the MPC in the studio using Simpty to track my drums. So yeah, it was just the whole, how everything worked and could be referenced. Okay, Alessandro Ponti has a question. Hi Greg, we're working on an organ VST that allows me to select and mix the different stops with key switches. Is it possible to create an expression map to continue them like registers, turning them on and off? So as long as you're doing, key switches, so I don't have an organ instrument that does that by key switches, but, once you know what the MIDI message is that would actually allow you to do that, you could just go to your expression map setup. And if you needed to create kind of a new expression map, you can just come over here, just say, okay, we want to add different sound slots, and you could build an expression map to do that. So it's not only for orchestrals, for orchestral functionality, but you can use it, for that, to switch different components in an organ. But generally, I'm not sure. And then probably the second part of this question, is it possible to create an expression map to combine them like registers, turning them on and off? So usually the expression map would be usually an expression map is just going to kind of change like which particular instrument. So it may make sense if you're doing for an organ to have the expression map, be used, maybe not use an expression map, but like 8 faders on your device to control the faders, the drawbars on your organ. And that way you could combine them like registers. So I would probably not use an expression map for that. I would probably, do a quick control assignment for the particular drawbars to make that work. See, John Barry's just saying pink noise is white noise with a 12 dB per octave filter. If I remember correctly, college was a long time ago. Yeah, that sounds right to me, John. So last time I kind of studied it was in college as well, many decades ago. All right, so we have Stefan from France. Thanks for joining us. All right, Jam Tracks Reunion asks, for input metering of a live source, is there any way to turn on input metering in Cubase 12 Pro? I cannot find this feature. It's so useful to have it in the DAW, not just in the hardware app. So if we have your source coming in, so let's say I switch my input. So let's say right now what we could have, I'll just bring this back over here. So let's say we're listening to our input meter here. So let's say we'll just go to the mix console so we could see. And let me just go directly here. Okay, so when we just come directly to our input source. So we could go to our metering. So and we're going to choose our global meter setting. So here we can see the input, and this is what is actually coming in to the particular file. So like what is being read off of the disk. But one of the things that you could do also is, have input channels. So let's say on, I'll just read this. So you want to turn, any way to turn on input metering and cannot find a feature so useful. So this is reading the input directly from like the audio file itself. But if we have a source, so let's say this is our input channel and we have audio going into this input, and we put a test tone on here. So we'll just put an oscillator. Okay, and let's set my input here to minus, just say minus 20. Okay, so all right, and I'm just going to set my actual inputs here. So let me just go to my audio connections, and we'll just do new project real quick just to show this. So if you want to see what signal is coming into your console, so again, or what is coming in, not into just your converter software. All right, so we have that as our input. Once you activate the input channels, right, so you should be able to see just kind of the input meter. So let me just switch my meter type here, see if this changes it. All right, so right now you can see whatever signal is coming into the input. If this is set to 0 dB on your input channels, you could see whatever signal is coming in here without it being attenuated. So at that point, if you wanted to see just what the actual input source is, look at the input meters, and those can be coupled or decoupled from audio tracks. So let me know if that makes sense, if that is helpful for you. Okay, so from VTS 404, thanks to Vishnu. Is there any way to lock the events to SMPTE, especially when working with video, so that tempo changes don't affect the events? So if you have, this will work whether you're in SMPTE or not. But often when working with timecode, let's say I have an audio file here. So let's say I have just a loop. Okay, so we just have some audio here. If the track is not set to musical mode, so tracks can be in linear mode or musical mode. So if, I'll just show this with a different example with video, just so we could see it a little. Let's see if I have this project still in recent list. Okay, and this would work regardless if you're synchronizing to SMPTE timecode or not. Okay, so let's open up our video window. So we could see that a lot of times when we have a particular event, all right, so let's say we have our tempo. So let's say we have our tempo of 120 beats a minute. So let's say we'll just come here and we'll do like world's worst film score. All right, so if I want these events to stay at the same time position, so we can see that these are going to come in, and we will look at our, I'll set one, let's add a ruler track. All right, and our ruler track, we want to set this to seconds, or we'll set this to time code rather. Okay. And we're going to set this track into linear mode. So we'll say these notes start at the same time. And this one we're going to place into musical mode. All right, so now when we do a tempo change, if the track is set to linear mode where we see a clock as opposed to a musical note, as I adjust the tempo, what the track that's going to be in linear mode will stay in the same position, and the track that's in musical mode will adjust. So again, as we change the tempo here, notice that the bottom track stays in the same position because that's in musical mode, so that's going to stay in the same exact position, and then the event that's set to linear mode as we adjust the tempo will change. So if you don't want the events to change with tempo, then all you have to do is just to place it into, and what's interesting, if we look at just the time differences here, you'll notice that for the track that's in musical mode, that it's going to stay at the same bar and beat position, but we see that the time is changing, but not the bar and beat as we change the tempo. So musical modes will stay in the same bars and beats, but will lock to our different time. So again, if you don't want events to be altered by tempo, all you have to do is place that into musical, and these will stay at the same time code position, but will be at different tempo. So experiment with musical and linear mode with that. All right, great to see Sven Isaacson on. Is there a reason, and then my chat field just jumped. Let me just find Sven's question. Okay, here it is. Sven's question: is there a reason to Cubase changing the time signature when using tempo detection? If someone as dumb as me can repair the structure, something as smart as Cubase should do it in a fraction of the time. So when Cubase does a tempo detection, it's figuring out what the beats are. Many times when people will have a live recording of something, it may not, we don't necessarily assume that all music is in 4/4. So if we do a new project and we just drop a file in, so let's say I have no idea, someone just sent me a multi-track or a recording. And a lot of audio engineers don't know what 5/4 versus 4/4 versus 3/4 versus 6/8. So when we do a tempo detection, it's going to not assume a particular time signature, because we don't, what if you have a 3/4 measure, let's say you have 4 measures of 3/4 and 1 3/4 measure, something like that. So when we do this, this is why we go to our tempo detection and we'll analyze, and it's going to figure out the tempo based on beats. So if I did this, you may say, okay, like this is a good example, there may be a pickup note. So we have a pickup note. So this is actually going to be a 1/4 bar, and we come in here, this is where our 4/4 bar is. So this way we could determine, we don't want everything to be off by a beat because there's a pickup note. So this is why you would go back and manually set up the tempo so that you could come over here and just hear the tempo changes as you do it. So, if we just assume that every song is in 4/4, that would be kind of a grave injustice to people using more complex meters or in 6/8, 12/8. So that's the reason why it doesn't automatically set it. So we see, and I see just follow up. I don't see the point in changing it. The time signature in the first place, a quarter note is a quarter note, regardless of the time signature. Well, quarter note could be different if you're in 6/8, but also with pickup notes. Okay. All right, so we see Ivan asks, hi Greg, when will Cubase 13 be released? So I think we'll see it soon. I can't really comment officially when it's going to be released. They're doing kind of soft test currently on the new online shop. So we'll see how that seems to be going well so far from what I hear. So we'll see how that is, how that is going. So that's going to be a big component that we want to be able to release it so that people can get it. You see Jazz Dude just saying peak noise is used often for loudspeaker measurement. So yeah. Okay, so Value says regular arranger track. I meant that drags and drops the whole parts together when dragging in a folder. Okay. Yes, I think I understand. Like, let's say if we had an arranger track here. So I'll just add an arranger track. All right, so let's say if I grab, I'll just try this. So let's see if I come here. So if you just like if you have the range tool and just double click, that you could select everything within the range, and then so I understand better. But if we just come over here, let's say while my range is selected. So yeah, so I can see where maybe you want to double click, like some tools that you could double click and select everything based upon your arranger track. I'll mention that to pass along. All right, so we see Frank, our Ice Cold Productions, Steinberg, please fix your store so we can get Cubase 13. Yeah. So we obviously want it fixed too. We, get a lot of revenue from having our online store. So we want to make sure that it's working, because it's better for it to work so that everyone can get it instead of it not working. So as of today, they are doing kind of little pilot tests with it. So if we just be patient, I think we'll see it soon. All right, so we see from Dr. Iman, sorry about that. Hi, Greg. Yes, your live stream's worth strongly to be considered for all Cubase users. Well, thanks for the kind words. Michael Teams just called me Yoda again. All right, so Jam Tracks Reunion says a question from last week on setting cycle markers automatically with the loop function. There is a custom key command called cycle follows range selection that will do it. Yeah, so we'll point that out and show that to people. So if you go to preferences under editing, there's a cycle follows range selection. That doesn't necessarily set the left and that doesn't. You can set the left and right locators with that, but it doesn't necessarily add a cycle marker with that. But that could kind of speed up the process if you have that. So as soon as I select a range here, it would automatically, or if I double click on a particular event with the range tool, that will automatically set the left and right locators around the event, and so that as we adjust the cycle, that the range, or as we adjust the range, the cycle reflects that. And again, that preference, come over here to Cubase, to preferences, editing, and then cycle follows range selection. So thanks for mentioning that. That's a great point. All right, so Jammin' Cannon says after you all finish your ice cream, he's distributing virtual tacos. All right, so that's great to have. I think it's our first live stream with taco distribution. Thanks for that. Tacos are good. Okay, so we see from Michael Teams, still having problems with external effects routing in and out. Please go over setting up an external effects again. Dinosaur here still. All right, so when we're working on this, we would go, let's say if we have a compressor, or I think Michael Teams has a finalizer, and if you wanted to utilize that on tracks or on a bus, you could do something like, okay, I want to take this track, we're going to route this to a group channel, so I want to take this and we'll call this a pre-master group. Okay, so I want to connect my audio inputs and outputs from my audio interface that are going to be connected to my external processor. So we'll go to our audio connections, so studio menu to audio connections, or you hit F4, function key 4. Click on add external effects. So let's say we want to call this, finalizer. And once we have this set up, if it's set up for stereo, we can say, okay, this is going to be connected into these inputs and outputs of my audio interface. So maybe I'm going out of outputs 5 and 6 and going in inputs 5 and 6. Then once I want to instantiate that particular plugin, we could do it on a channel. So just like we would normally go to like an insert, at this point we would come over and we would see external plugins, and then you can say, okay, let's go to the finalizer. Once we have that done, realizing that by the time the audio goes out of the interface into another set of A to D, D to A converters, possibly, like in the case with the finalizer, and it goes through its processing and sends it back out through the D to A converter back into your audio interface. That could impose a latency, and to offset that latency we could ping the system and measure the delay, and that will ping and automatically compensate for any outboard delays that are imposed by the routing of the external instrument. So once again, go to your studio menu, to audio connections, add the external effects. Now, something that could throw this off is if you have direct monitoring engaged on the inputs. So, if it seems like maybe the signal isn't going out, try disabling direct routing as well. And you can do that by often going to your studio menu, to studio setup, and make sure direct monitoring is turned off. Okay, so we see Peter just saying, where would that Word document located on the Cubase Nation Discord server be? Yeah, and Peter, if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to share the Word document with you, and I'll try to send it to Jazz Dude at the end of every month. Just one comment: for a week from today will be the last live stream of the month, and we'll be doing our Zoom meetup, and we will have a special guest. Tim Hinckley will be joining us. He's had kind of a legendary career. It's like 55-year career. He's recorded with everyone from the Rolling Stones to The Who, Bad Company, Whitesnake, George Harrison. I think he wrote a song with maybe Alvin Lee. So just all sorts, just an amazing career. So we'll have a special guest, Tim Hinckley, for our live stream or Zoom social meetup 1 week from today, starting at 3 o'clock U.S. Eastern, so 2 hours into the live stream. So before I forget, I just want to mention that. So Tim's been kind enough to agree to join us and share some insights. He's been a Cubase user, I think, since '89. All right. Okay, so we see from Vishnu saying the auto fade explanation really helpful. Okay, and we have Nick from Essex in the UK. Glad you can make it today. All right, we see Randy Lee checking in from Texas. Glad you could be here with us. Thanks for joining. And John is coming from a surprisingly gentle Wisconsin. So if you're not familiar with Wisconsin weather, it could get cold there very easily. And he lives off, not far from Lake Michigan. So. All right, so we see a question. If I split an audio track into several parts, is it possible to apply an effects only to one part of the audio? So we could do that without having to split. So we could do this through kind of like an offline process. So let's say I have this file here. All right, and let me just... check my routing on. All right, so say I want to do just processing on just a part of the file. So what I could do is, okay, I want to take, just a portion of the file and maybe, so let's say, okay, I want to take this portion and put a flanger on it for a couple of bars. So I could select that particular, I'm just going to grab my range tool, so the second tool here, select the range. You could go a couple of different ways. One is you could just say, let's go to plugins, and I want to put a flanger on it. So we'll come right over here, And now as we play back, and if I take off the loop, and then when that selected range is done, we're right back to where we were. So if you want to say, okay, let's just come here, I want it to apply, you know, just a different process. You could just come select that particular range and say, okay, even if I wanted to invert the phase, and let's take that range and I want to reverse. Then you're right back. But what's kind of cool about it is I could say, oh, I didn't like the phase inversion. I could, even after saving it, I could come over, right click on the event, and we will delete, and we could still have our flanger and still have the reverse. So if I want to select the flanger here, I could just delete that and keep the reverse completely intact. So you don't have to cut anything, just kind of select it with the range tool. And you could also do this by going into your audio menu, and this is basically the direct offline processing that was opened, and then you could do different sample editing, sample processing, and effects processing without having to split the audio file. All right, so we see Michael Teams is getting rain in Weatherford, Texas. Probably a nice welcome relief after your pretty brutal summer. All right, great to see Michael Marshall from Somerset, UK. Glad you can make it and join us today. All right, so we see Clay Lahat. How can I get control room to output to headphone out and another out for speakers at the same time with separate set of inserts for each? So I think if you just come over here, I don't have a mechanism of testing it just to make sure right now, but if we go to your audio connections and go to control room, so we could add our we could add our speakers, so we have our monitors, but there's also a headphone output, so we have a phones channel. So at this point I could remove the phones, and as we come over here, so right click and let's add headphones. So this would go to separate outputs. So let's say, okay, I want this to go, you know, to my separate outputs than what we're sending here. And I believe that those will both sound, I could be mistaken, but this, when we go to our phones tab, this is our headphone volume, and this will be the volume for the speakers. And when we go to our inserts, we can see that the phones could have different inserts. So if you have like a headphone monitoring plugin, you could come over and run something like that. So if you say, okay, I just want it to go to so you can say, okay, I want to use like Immerse for my headphones, and I wanted to use a different monitoring system for my speakers. We could set up different components like that. So I believe that those will sound at the same time. So, and you could have independent, so, and to see the inserts for the speakers, you want to just click on the main to kind of bring up the parameters from the bottom, and for the headphones you could have your different inserts. I believe that those will sound at the same time, so let me know if that will help for you. All right, wonderful to see Dwight Cunningham from the Bahamas checking in. All right, so Dwight Cunningham asks, Greg, is it possible to record the drum patterns in HALion Sonic? I know you can drag and drop. All right, so let me just look for, I'll just add an instrument track here. Let's get a HALion Sonic. I'm not sure if HALion Sonic comes with drum patterns or not. There may be a couple. All right, so let me just... Okay, so let's come over here. And let me see if these are any. So, I mean, you could program, let me just, is it possible to record the drum patterns in HALion Sonic? I know you can drag and drop. Let me just see if there's some that maybe has patterns. I'm not sure if, so we have some drum pads. I mean, you could obviously program patterns using something like, you know, Beat Designer or just in the Midi editor. So you could just say, but let me know if it's a particular kit. But I mean, you could just come here and, you know, if you wanted to just, you know, program the beats. So, you know, I'm not, so if there's a particular pattern that is, you know, kind of, if there's a particular instrument that has a pattern, let me know. And it could be, you know, like a lot of times if you have, you know, patterns, they may be able to be dragged out. Like these we have, let me just see if there's, I think these will trigger chords. And then if we wanted to if it's a pattern like this, you could just drag it out to, you know, and these may be like different chords, but you could drag them to the project window. So let me know, Dwight, if it's a specific HALion Sonic preset. All right, so Ted Springman asks, great to see you on from Los Angeles. Hi, Greg. Are there any generic QC presets within Wavelab for engineers to quickly scan for obvious audio errors? All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so let's say we just wanted to. So if you go to an analyze and, you know, just come over here to global analysis, this is what a lot of my mastering friends will do. And here they could automatically see what peaks are. You know, if there's loudness, you know, what your overall loudness is, what pitch is, extra. So if you need to do DC offset, and if there's errors, you could automatically find possible glitches. So at this point, you could just say, okay, find clip samples, 10 points, and then that will automatically take you to that. You could come over here to the focus and look for particular areas as you say, okay, just, maybe this is, and then say, okay, maybe it's here, and then that could take you to an area of focus. So I would try the global analysis, and it's always a great thing to do before sending out any master. There's a lot of people, like my friend Greg Lukens, who's an amazing mastering engineer. I was listening to some record, and his thing that he always does is he looks for DC offset. And it's just amazed how many records go through that have DC offset. That's pretty obvious, but a lot of people just forget to look for it on the final stage. And I go, oh, I feel dumb. And, they'll get a call from Greg, like the mastering engineer is like, hey, you really needed to check for this, just so you know. He will call up like the engineers, like, that your reverb return was out of phase on this, and they're like, it's interesting to see the reaction. He's a blind mastering engineer, does amazing stuff. All right, so we see from Kevin, hi sir, I'm planning to buy Cubase Pro 12. Does SpectraLayers come with it? Do SpectraLayer come with it? Backbone? What are the instruments do I get? Which one should I pay separately? Do I get Atmos? I'm confused by some misinformation. So Cubase 12 Pro does have Atmos. You get a SpectraLayers 1. So that's a light version of SpectraLayers, which will allow you to extract vocals from a particular audio file. Backbone is sold separately. You get Groove Agent. The instruments that will come with it will be, when you go to add instruments, so you get Groove Agent SE included. You get HALion Sonic, which will play back many different instruments and can host libraries of different instruments. Pad Shop, which is a granular synthesizer, and Retrolog, which is a virtual analog synthesizer. But when we go to HALion Sonic, there are a number of different sound sets that come with it. Some of these are sold separately, but this way you could say, oh, I wanted a piano with like an atmospheric piano. I could have Verve, or if I wanted just different, you'll see like the HSSE Artist and Basic and Pro. These will have like your Rhodes, organ, strings, so lots of kind of your bread and butter sounds. But Backbone is not sold separately. A light version of SpectraLayers comes with it, called SpectraLayers 1. So, and again, you get Groove Agent SE, HALion Sonic, and HALion Sonic is a playback engine for many different instruments, Retrolog, and Pad Shop. And it does include Atmos. All right, so we see Alessandro says, thank you very much for the answer, Greg. That's what I thought regarding the expression map. As I face this situation, it's like a classic church organ, so registers are an on-off type. So, even if you just use, just come over here and let's say, okay, I want to use this button to turn the registers on and off in my generic remote, like in my Midi remote devices, you could just program particular buttons to turn off the MIDI remote. So that's what I would do. And instead of utilizing kind of expression maps, because you can't necessarily, expression maps are kind of in, we're playing, it's intended for we're playing this sound and this sound, but not necessarily combining articulations that would be done within the instrument. All right, so we see from jam tracks reunions, that is awesome. Okay, I see what you mean about the input channels, and you can couple them to an audio channel. Okay, let me play that and see how it works. In that case, it's a snare drum and a mic input. So yeah, you could see it directly in the input channel. You could attenuate it to add gain or cut gain. So you can add or cut gain to it, but if it's at 0 dB, that will show you exactly what's coming into your system. And I've used it a lot for like festival recording where, oh, this is as loud as we'll ever get, and then inevitably the performance is 6 dB louder. Then you could just bring all the input channels down in software. All right, so Roland Gerard asks, do we need to reset our password from the store since the supplier went bankrupt? So I think I haven't experienced it yet. I know that there was some discussion where it may be just your My Steinberg login credentials would work for the new store, but I haven't tried it yet. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I think that your AskNet credentials would no longer be valid. You may be able to set it, but I'd kind of asked if that was the plan to unify the experience for end users logging in for their credentials. And they said that they were working on getting that, but I didn't get the invitation to try the new online shop yet, so I haven't had a chance to experience it. But I think that your AskNet credentials will no longer be valid. You may have to set up some for the new shop, but we'll see if it's going to utilize your My Steinberg credentials. Okay, so Rex Effect asks, I just bought Cubase 12 this month. Will I get a free upgrade to Cubase 13? So I think you'll be safe, but I can't announce when the official grace period update was set from. But I think you'll be okay. We'll wait for an official announcement. All right, so we have Jan Lee Hooker says, hi Greg, thanks to have you here. So thanks for being on the live stream. All right, so great to see Glenn Dozier. Says, hi everyone, is there a fixed run Cubase 12 on Sonoma? So I think that this is really an issue on Apple's side. I know Steinberg was working with them. I've read online that people that have gotten the next version of the public beta of Sonoma, that it's working as expected. So it was something that kind of popped up in the very last week of testing for Sonoma. So, and Steinberg had been communicating with Apple on it for, as soon as it popped up. Okay, Jazzy O'Mel asks, greetings, Greg. Can I ask some questions about Wavelab? So how do I put EQ and compression on each song clip without affecting the master and keeping things the same? Okay. So let's jump over to Wavelab. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. So let's... Okay, so let's say we have a montage here. So when we come to a particular clip, let's come over to, we can't have clip-based effects. So when we go here, we see the master section. Let's go to the inspector. And now we could have clip based effects. So I could come over here and we could say, okay, I want to go to my EQ. So I want frequency EQ, and I want it to have, let's just put something horrible, a delay. So that's going to be based on that clip. When I go to this clip, and we could have completely different plugins. So I can say, okay, now we go to this clip, we see no clip effects. We go to this clip, we see a de-esser. This clip, we could have these particular plugins shown. So just go here. You could have plugins in the master section that everything gets routed through. And then plugins, when you click on the inspector, just choose, you could do it on the track level, on individual clips, depending on what you have selected there. So let me know if that's helpful for you. But yeah, you could definitely do that in Wavelab. All right, so we see Jan Lee Hooker ask, is there a way to have Cubase loading my default channel EQ preset also in a project from a customer? So I believe that the EQ, you could save your default EQ preset. So let's say this is, your default EQ, and when we're in the channel EQ, if you have that set as the default, that will load up. If a project comes in that has its own EQs without, that someone intentionally set EQs for, then that would override the default. If there is no settings on the EQ, it would go to your default EQ settings. So if the project, when you open it up, if someone had applied EQ, that will override the default settings. So because that's what was saved within the particular project. You could then override that, but if the project comes with EQ settings, those will take priority over the default settings. If there is no EQ settings, then the default will be enabled. Okay, says Sven Hagen. Help, I started with automation on a tempo track, but roughly around 180 BPM. Now I want to redo it in 90 BPM and adjust double all Midi so it sounds the same as before. What do I do? Okay, so let's just do new project here. I think there's a logical editor preset for this. All right, so let's just add an instrument track here. We'll just do Groove Agent SE. Okay, so let's say just all right, so I will come over and let's just put in some quarter notes here. Okay, so we have quarter notes. And I'll just paint in a couple of measures. Okay. And let's say our tempo map is at 180. So we'll add a tempo track. Let's say we're at 180. So now we play back. Okay, so now we're at 180. So let's come over here to our logical editor. So now when we slow it down to 90 beats a minute, all right, so the goal is to have the same sound, but at kind of like a half. We want to keep the sound the same. So let's go over to our Midi logical editor. Let's go to our setup. And I think that there is a preset for this, like double tempo or half tempo. All right, so you see under, so we can say, all right, so just a logical editor preset called half tempo. So let's come over here and we will now change our tempo to 90. All right, so let's try. All right, so let's see if we can do double tempo. Okay, so let's try half tempo. So now we do, all right, and I will, let's just look at this in the editor here. And I'll just switch this to drum editor. Okay, so now, so tempo's at 180. Let's run the double tempo for, and our Midi will now play back at 90. Yeah. So for all the Midi data, look for the project logical editor, and this has been in, this particular preset's been in for years, but you can say type is equal to note, and type is unequal to note, and we're going to take the length and the position and multiply by 2, or divide by 2. So that way it's going to play back, and that will shift all the MIDI so that when you have the tempo that it's going to sound the same. So use the double tempo logical editor preset, and again you get to the logical editor by going to your MIDI menu to set up, look for the double tempo and select all your MIDI, and then just run that particular preset, Sven, and I think you'll be all set. See, Jazz Dude just says Alvin Lee 10 years after is a legend. So yeah, it's great stuff. Yeah, and Tim is just like, you know, is like, you know, I always love reading his Facebook posts. It's like, oh, my first band I was in with Mick Fleetwood as the drummer, and you know, knew Mitch Mitchell and just like everyone in the British rock scene in the 60s and 70s. Tim knew. All right. So we're anxious to have him on as a guest. All right, so we see from Yazian says, can I delete my Steinberg account and restart the trial again? So I'm not sure if that would work. You know, we try not to have people run perpetual trial versions. But let me know if you're, you know, if you are waiting for, if your trial ran out in Cubase 12, I may be able to have it extended for you. If you know, if you can't purchase the upgrade where you live. All right, so we see Balsa just ask, thanks Greg for the tip on the individual track loop option for beat making while the rest plays independently. Used MIDI, but can it be done with dragging audio sample on the audio track. So that same concept can work with MIDI or audio. So just within the sample editor, you could set the independent track loop as well. So come over here, let's just so it's really the same principle. So we'll come over here. Let's make sure that so we have the independent track loop here and set the left and right locators. So while this part of the track is playing in a loop forever and ever, the project is going on in its completely independent track version. So you could just come over here and work on it. So it works with MIDI and audio. All right, always wonderful to see Miss Sable Winters on. Glad you could make it today. Sable is like number 69. And Michael Teams has granted her 1 gallon of Cherry's Jubilee ice cream. So we see from John Barry, hi Greg, any chance we can see some solution to channel following and mixer bank for the faders in external controllers using the Mackie control protocol? It seems has been achieved in Logic. Realize that so that is the Mackie control protocol, doesn't accommodate for that. And I think a Logic initially, when the Mackie controller was released, it was called a Logic control, as a joint venture between Mackie and eMagic at the time, and then because of the lack of success, they opened it up to the rest of the market. But those settings are actually kind of determined by Mackie and what is in the protocol for that. So there are many systems that not relying on Mackie control protocol, but if we break it for one device, if the other devices don't follow it, then the whole concept of a protocol is kind of thrown out the window. So while it may work on one particular piece of hardware, it may not work with all of them. All right, so we see Clay says a question regarding the control room and the UR44. I'm not sure how to address the headphones out on the UR44. So depending on your unit, you may just see if when you go to your studio menu, if it's an original UR44, you'd probably see the it may be under more options, and you may see like the UR44 listed here, or an audio hardware device. And then you could choose which outputs the UR44 is utilizing. Let me just see, and if it's a UR44C, so that way you could say outputs 3 and 4 are using my headphone out, and outputs, but you could also just kind of, and if it's a UR44C, once you come here, you could choose kind of like, I think we could set up the headphone. This only has a one headphone output on my UR242. So I can't really show how to do the routing, because the routing is but I think you could set up the headphone routing in the little control panel applet directly from here, or from the hardware settings on UR44C from the inspector itself. Okay, John Barry asks, hi Greg, another question. Is there a way to create a shortcut to a specific mapping page in the MIDI remote and not just next or previous? Many thanks. So yeah, you could have a specific mapping. So let's say we'll go to our MIDI remote, and let's say on my, I'll just switch this over to Untitled here. So let's say I want to hit this particular button and go to a specific mapping page. So let's say I'm currently on Untitled and I want this to switch to Mixer when I hit, we'll do this button. So I'm going to double click here. Let's go to our functions, mapping page actions. And then under mapping page actions, we will say activate Mixer. Okay, and it's going to be assigned to this particular button. So right now we see Untitled page. I hit this button. We now are in the Mixer page. So again, to do that, just double click, open up the mapping page. You can see the functions browser. You'll see mapping page actions, and then all of the pages you could assign to a particular keyboard shortcut. So again, we will say, let's go to the Mixer. And I switch from my Untitled mapping page, hit this button. It now switches to the Mixer mapping page. So as you design mapping pages, you could kind of build that in if you need to. Like, okay, I want to go between my 8 sends. I could hit this button and now control all the sends, on this particular channel or whatever you want to do. So. All right, my chat field jumped on me. Let me see. Okay, so I think I'm close. All right, so we see Doug O says, hi Greg, are MIDI loops limited to one track? If I have multiple MIDI tracks, I want to save it. Is the only method to export a MIDI file. So MIDI loops are really intended for one single track that's loaded to one particular instrument. And I think that they are limited, so let me just try. So I'll just add. So, but if you want it, so the intention of the MIDI loop is you drag and drop it in. It loads up the same instrument, the same preset, and has all that information. Whereas if you want to take MIDI data from one project to another, that's when you could use MIDI files. I don't think we could do multiple MIDI loops at once, but I'll test it just to see. Okay, so we'll add 2 retrolog tracks. Okay, I want to add a string voice here to say one note. Okay, and on this one, we'll add a high brass part. We'll just do a quick chord. Okay, so we'll come here. Let's select these, and I don't think it's going to even allow us to do. Let's export MIDI loops. So let's see. retro log stack. Okay, we'll do a new project. Okay, so we'll do our retro log stack. We'll see what happens. Yeah, it's just going to be one event at a time. So if you want to do multiple, but as you can see, that this will automatically recall the sound with the particular instrument, whereas MIDI files aren't going to load up the instruments. So they're really kind of two different design tasks. Now, another thing that you could do is, let's say I have this as a file, so I'm going to come over here. Let's save this project. All right, and we'll call it Oct24. And now, if you wanted to, you could say, I want to import tracks from project. We can come over, find the project here. So let's say this is the project, and we can say, okay, I want to take these two retrolog tracks and import them into the project. So you could do that as well. So that's another method if you didn't want to use like a standard MIDI file. Okay, Duggo also asks, could you please show how to have multiple VST instruments on a single track and how to add changes between instruments? So, one of the things that you could do is if you start off with a MIDI track. So I will start here. I'm going to add a MIDI track. And it doesn't work from an instrument track, but it could work from a MIDI. And let's say, okay, let's just stack. We'll call it like a synth stack. Okay, and if we go to our MIDI we'll go to MIDI sends on the MIDI track. So I will come over here. Let's get to my MIDI sends. And you don't see MIDI sends on a particular on instrument tracks. So I could say, let's send this to, our retrolog. And let's send it to retrolog here. Let's add a pad shop. So I'll add a pad shop instrument. Okay, so now we'll get to our synth stack and we'll just come over here. So I'm not actually assigning a particular plugin. I could come over here and we'll activate it and say, okay, now we will go to pad shop. And as I play one instrument, one track, this will stack all of them together, and I can say, okay, this retrolog, I want down an octave, so we could come over to like the MIDI modifiers and say, okay, let's just transpose it down. So now we have, when we go to our synth stack, So you could do it that way. Another method that works, equally well is just so we could do like MIDI sends to 4 instruments. We could also just come here if you wanted to take like, 100 instruments and put them into a folder track. So we'll say, I'm going to move selected tracks to new folder. All right, so I move these to a folder. I could close the folder, and then I could record just on this particular folder. So I'll come here and I'll just play chord. That now we could just, record all of your particular tracks. So let me just... And I've recorded on a folder track, but it's mirrored the performance to every MIDI track within the particular folder track as well. So 2 methods. Let me just get a message from Zed's team. All right, so let's go to next question. So let me know if that would be... So there's a couple of different approaches. Sorry, things are falling on my desk now. All right, so we see from Jaylee Kumar how to use a MIDI script file. So if it's for like patch name scripts, you could come over to your studio. Let's get to, or go to your studio menu. Let's go to more options, and then we'll see the MIDI device manager. And at this point, you could just come over and install device. And if you drop them into like the patch scripts folder, then it will show up here. So you could now just say, okay, when we go to add a particular device, that may cause a brain melt going to IAC, but let's say we come over here and I set this to output to my D50, that we could now see your patch scripts for your D50 laid out. So I think that you would have to like on Mac OS, I think the patch scripts will show up. So let's say if we go to Finder, and you may have to come over here to Go and hold down the Option key, because Apple doesn't want you to find the library apparently, and come over here to, I think it's going to be under Preferences. And you can go down to Presets under Cubase. And then I think that you would see like patch scripts in here. So it might be under presets, but you could drop it, and I'm sure you could just kind of search for the folder. Let me just see. But I think it's going to be under, and it might be just listed. But if you want to email me, I could get the exact location for you, but I'm sure you could get the answer quickly enough by Googling if necessary. But let me know if those are the patch scripts that the MIDI scripts that you're referring to. Okay, so we see from Ness. Hi Greg, I just got a new Mac Studio ME2. What is the best to work with, Rosetta or native in Cubase, and does it make a difference in CPU? So Cubase and all of its internal plugins are set to be running natively, so you could run it in Apple Silicon mode. The only reason to run it in Rosetta mode is if you have plugins that are VST2, because VST2 plugins from 2008 aren't going to work with Apple Silicon. They're not going to be native. They can run in Rosetta mode. And if your audio, so other plugins, third-party plugins, or your audio interface, Midi devices, if your control surface, if those don't work in Apple Silicon mode, then you could run in Rosetta. But everything in Cubase and all the Steinberg components are set up to work natively in Apple Silicon. So I would start there. All right, you see Michael Teams has got a new Lawton LA322 mic. This is very responsive and great character. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I have a X-Touch and used a BGO LUC MIDI remote script for it. Lately, the script doesn't load with new projects anymore, and I have to manually add and start the script. Anything I could do. So generally, the MIDI script will be, I think that you could have it a default mode. So like a lot of times when let's say if I disconnect my nano control here, so it was in mixer. Now when I connect it here, I'm going to reconnect it. We'll see if it goes to a default mode or goes to the last mode. So it looks like it goes directly to the last. Let's say if I go to focus quick controls, I'm going to unplug it, and we'll see if it just connects directly back to the last state. So it looks like it goes back to the last state here. So I'm not sure if I think I may have kind of interacted with you on Facebook about this, but if it's the BJO LUC, if that's just a MIDI remote script. So it looks like to me that it maintains the last setting. But let's see if there is any default stats for the script page. So I wonder if you had so if let me know if it's when you go into the mapping page. Right, so we could duplicate that. If it goes to the very top one, but it looks to me like when it's disconnected and connected, it goes to its last known state. But if you could clarify if the BJO LUC is a MIDI script, MIDI remote script for me, that would be helpful. All right, so we see Greg, please, I need general feedback about Backbone. So Backbone is like a really slick sound design and drum synthesizer. So if you're doing a lot of, if you wanted to, and it even has AI functionality so that you could have it automatically generate different kick drum sounds for you. So as we kind of load it up, I don't work with it all the time, but let's say if we wanted to have, different bass sounds, like as you come over here, you could break parts into like the tonal and into pitch, apply filters, and then you could come over here and just adjust for each of the components, and it's also like, you know, really good at being able to, let's say, okay, I just want to come over here to different kicks, you know, and to work with kind of, you know, drum synthesis. I think it's like an incredibly deep program, but some of my favorite content with it also gets to be like some of the impacts that you have, because you could have different stuff. And some of these I believe were done by Robert Dudzik, who's like just you know, just a wonderful sound designer, composer. Watch some of his stuff on Google, you know. But you could have different impacts like on note release, yeah. And then as soon as you like release the key, you could have different notes that will play. But it's going to be really set up just as a very slick synthesis function. So you say, okay, I wanted to come over here, I could have just kind of my blast, and then, okay, I want to resynthesize it, adjust the formant, let's adjust the pitch. So all sorts of different functions that you could do. So think of it as you know, it's kind of marketed as a drum synthesizer, but it's going to be just a really wonderful sound design tool as well. So you can watch like Dom Segalis' videos on it, are really wonderful, give you a great run through of it. All right, wonderful to see Gerald Ely on from Martinez, California. And great to see Ash Rebel Hen Studios from Australia. All right, so we have Bill B. says, hey, Greg, checking in from the North Sentinel Island today. I have a question. Is there a way to keep track of what page is in focus on the MIDI remote control when controlling a VSTI on a MIDI keyboard? So, you know, as you're, you know, so you have like different mapping pages, and the mapping page can be just indicated directly here. So if whatever, you know, particular mapping page that you want, so, you know, depending on, you know, which particular, you know, so you might have to actually just come over here and open up, but you could see the mapping page here and see exactly, you know, and as you click on functions, what function is going to be controlled. But just look at the mapping page here, and you could call up just the MIDI remote and with a keyboard shortcut and see kind of the mapping page. And so just kind of look right there at the mapping page, and that should show you. Okay, reading through comments. All right, great to see Lanewood Studios on. So we see from Ash Rebel Hen Studios, it'd be great if they can make Cubase 13 happen this year. Not likely. So I may take a bet with you on that. So, all right. So we see Nick just says 100 likes last stream, got the shop trial open. Maybe 100 likes today will get us a proper shop in Cubase 13. So. Yeah, so realize that they're, you know, doing their due diligence and testing. So that's why they're kind of starting with a smaller subset and make sure everything is going well. Because if it didn't go well, then people would really be upset. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. Okay, Matt Lewis asks, hi Greg, basic question I know. How do I open the window that shows my routing, sends, and inserts? Thank you for your help as always. Okay. Okay, so if we have just an audio track here, so let's jump to here. We open up this so we can see our inserts, and then if you want to see, so here we can see the sends, and if you wanted to now see like the panning, and let's come over, and there's also just like the little function here we can say show the output chain. So if we have this track that's going to a group channel, we could now just say, okay, we want to take this. I'm just going to reread the question, make sure I'm not. Okay, how do I open a window that shows my routing, sends, and inserts? So it's really just, to open this window, just all you have to do is just click on the E, which is the edit channel settings. And you can see the E right here on the inspector as well. And then you can see your inserts, routing, sends, EQ, channel strip. So let me know if that's what you need, Matt. All right, so Roland Gerard asks, hi Greg, is there a chance that the very audio, like in Melodyne chords, will be available in Wavelab? The one in Cubase works only fine for voices. You could, I'm not sure if it's monophonic that you want to be working with or like polyphonic. So I don't think that, I haven't heard of any intentions to utilize Wavelab for very audio, just because most people are using Wavelab as a separate audio editor and using very audio within a musical creative context like music creation and production. I think that's kind of more appropriate for Cubase. So Melodyne does have polyphonic functionality, and when we do very audio, it's just going to be for a single voice instrument like voice, but I've used it on tuning orchestral stuff, orchestral performances a lot. I just did a string quartet, which I did a lot of very audio editing in. So it's not just limited for voices, but let me know if it's, if you wanted to do polyphonic. But I think that it still would, if it very audio went polyphonic, it would still make sense to have it in Cubase as opposed to Wavelab. All right, so it says, would it be possible to display listeners' questions while you're explaining? It seems to me that'd be easier to. I don't think that after the live stream, I do go back. I take a dinner break and I go back and I watch the entire live stream, and we type up everyone's questions with timestamps. So afterwards, if you go to the very top comment it's going to be pinned to the very top of the comments field. That way you could just simply navigate directly to a particular question. So I think that works pretty well. All right, so Kim asks, anyone here experience the automation gets stuck in right position bug? It's documented on various forums. Really hoping version 13 fixes this. So I haven't run into that, but if you want to send me like a forum link, I've seen sometimes when people have I did see someone who accidentally created a macro, or that the macro had automation right turned on, or when they and also sometimes people will. So I've seen a lot of people make mistakes. I'm not saying that's the case, but if you have a particular scenario that you're running through a forum, a forum post, I'd be happy to take a look at it, and you could share it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. So once again, just send it along to clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I could include it in my reports. Okay, so we see John Barry about the mapping pages from the Midi remote. Says, thanks for that, Greg. I can use that. Cheers. All right, great. All right, so we see from Michael asks, hi Greg, in Elements 12 drum map, if I change the I note on G#1 to F1, the map changes the original F1 I note to G#1 as well. Is there a way to change one I note without it reciprocating? Okay, so let me try to recreate that. So let's say I've added an instrument track, and we have a Groove Agent SE. Okay, so I'll just say let's have our general MIDI drum map. I will okay. Okay, so it says you have original F1 note to G#1. Okay, so all right, so let me just change. Okay, so let's say we have F1, and let's look at G# here, that if when we change this. All right, so I think, all right. Okay, so if I change the I note from G#1 to F1, so say G#1 to F1 here. The map changes the original F1 I note to G#1 as well. Okay, so when I come here, so let's say we're at F1. We see G#1 here, so so I change this to F1. My G#1 stays the same. So, or if I change this, let's say we go to so you might, so what I, a lot of times I don't change, so I'm not sure if you have like a particular note that's coming. So what I tend to do myself, so maybe the approach to take would be just to leave the in note and maybe just set the O note to the particular level that you want. Because usually what we do is we take the input note, and then if this is playing the wrong sound, remap the output note. So maybe try, instead of remapping the I note, the input note, try just to remap the out note if you want it to play a different sound than what it's currently triggering. And let me know if that makes sense. All right, so we could, we'll see just a question from Benny. Question, to mark an audio track and normalize it and use macro to do it, is it possible? So, realize that a lot of times tracks will be, you know, like we normalize the events and not the tracks, but if you wanted to do, let's say I'll drag these out, and we'll put it onto one track. So we have a number of tracks here. So let's make a macro. So we'll go to Edit, to Key Commands, and we will choose a new macro. Okay, so I think first thing we want to do is maybe select. I think there's a select all on track. Maybe under Edit. Select all on tracks. Let's add that. So I'm not sure if you want it to normalize to a particular level. So let's add. All right, so now we have these tracks. So what I want to do is, let's run the macro. My macro list is growing. So normalize events on track. It'll ask us to set a level. So let's say, okay, I want it to be -18. And it's automatically done that for us. So let's say, okay, I want this to be -3. It's now automatically done that. So I just went to the key commands. Let's get to our macros. And I just selected edit, select all on tracks for the selected track, and then process normalize, and then you could set the value from the normalize window if you wanted to. So give that a try, Benny. Thanks for the question. All right, wonderful to see Daniela from Germany on. Thanks, glad you can make it today. And always so great to see Mark Rabin on with his dog Stella, who's always a loyal attendee, our canine attendee. So we'll say woof woof to Stella. She apparently loves my voice. So. All right, so we see Gerald Ely says using MIDI sends to multiple VSTs. Nice. All right, so the Heartbreak Time Machine says he smashed the like button, and Mark Raven was like number 88. So we see Greg from Ash Rebel Hen Studios. Hey, Greg, have you had any leaks on Cubase 13? Did you get your wish list on the lyric track? So we'll have to see when it's officially announced. Realize that I may be under a non-disclosure agreement, and if I, shared anything, it would be on a live YouTube stream that would be forever and ever on YouTube. That would be a bad thing. So, but we'll see what is available. I'm sure there'll be lots of wonderful new things. All right, so we see from Daniela, do you have, for Patch Up to, a gospel choir example, Greg? We just bought a Shep's MRT. So usually, what Patch Up is doing is taking a particular sound and breaking it down. So it's not necessarily kind of like a sample playback. So let's take a look. Let's say we have a choir. Let me just look for maybe choir sound sample. All right, so let's say we have something like this. I realize it's not a typical choir, but now if we add an instrument track, so we'll add a pad shop. We could drag this file in, and now we can come over here and kind of start to play. So, if you're doing if you want more realistic, choir sounds, you might be able to find something, and sample it into, Pad Shop isn't probably the tool to use to, I want to make a orchestral, like a choir type library. I would probably use something like HALion instead. We see Randy Lee's phone dying, so he must exit. All right, so we see Daniela says she has a Shep's MST74 ORTF microphone. I'd like to record some choir and dialogue. Plan is to make a live concert recordings to make with Pad Shop 2 sample library for Unify. Yeah, so I would, I would probably, for, like people would get Pad Shop to take apart samples, and if you wanted to have more traditionals, like choral samples, I would probably utilize HALion for that. All right, see Mark Rabin saying hi to Sable. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, reading through comments still. Thanks for all the great comments from everyone. Okay, just reading through comments still. Okay, so we see from Ash Rebel Hen Studios, Greg, I can only get Metronome to work while using the control room as output. I had to change output recently to output. Notice Metronome makes no sound now. What am I missing? So let's say I will come over. So let's say we're playing here and I hear the metronome, and the metronome is being routed through the control room. So if you don't hear the metronome, you could just simply enable it here in the control room. So make sure that that is done. If you're not using the control room, we'll come over to our audio connections. I'll disable control room, and let's just go to my outputs. I'll set my outputs to go out of 1 and 2, and the metronome is automatically turned on there. But let's go to, so at that point it's automatically being routed to the outputs. And if you have the control room activated, at this point, make sure that you have, so now everything is routed to the control room, and you can just activate it right here. So you may have to just look in the main area of the control room and make sure that your metronome is turned on. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Ash Rebel Hen Studios. Wonderful to see Gareth Kitch on. So says in his kind words of, sorry, my contact lens slipped. All right, big applause for Greg. Does a fantastic job making these hangouts for us. So I'm just glad to help out people, and it's just, I think it's a great resource, and I, feel privileged to be able to help assist people with like this. I used to have to fly like 10 hours to do stuff like this all the time, and now I could see 1,000 times more people and do it online. All right, so we see from Baser Rocius, hello to all. Would you explain marker track functions and options? Okay, so a marker track is going to allow us to, navigate to different parts in our project. So let's say, like we have a verse, chorus, bridge, kind of song or song structure. So we could say, I want to add a marker track. And in Cubase, we could have up to 10 separate marker tracks. So one could be like song, song things, like song structure. So we'll add a marker track. And what we could do now is just say, okay, this is going to be song structure. Okay, so we can say, okay, I want to come here. And we could drop markers in. Now, if we come over here, we could just say, okay, this is going to be intro. We could open up the marker window, and it's just Shift plus M. We'll say verse 1. Pre-chorus. Chorus. Verse 2, and solo. So now we could just come over here, and someone says, oh, let's go to the pre-chorus. You could now use like the N or B keys to quickly navigate to that section of a song. Now, you could also have a different marker track. And let's say while you're listening to music, so we could have 10 marker tracks, but one marker track that's kind of active. At this point, you could just say you're listening to it and say, oh, okay, man, something weird is here. Something, like as you're listening to it, these are, mistakes or edits. And so as you're listening to it, you can say, oh, right here, something weird happened. Now, you could also have a marker track that could be set up for lyrics in your song. So you can say, let's add a marker track. And as we start off, we'll just put in some lines of lyrics. So we will all right, so now we could just come over here and we could have like our lyrics up. So when the singer goes, oh, that phrase to the song, can you go there? And you can just say, oh, okay, well, let's just come here and we'll select go to song. Oh, I want to go to this line where I sang to navigate. Let's punch that part in again. So you could now just look at the lyrics that are kind of in the timeline, because a lot of times if someone's cutting vocals, like a musician reading the chart may say, okay, let's get a measure 64. But the musician may go, I need to go to this line. I sang this word bad, go to this word. And then you could quickly navigate to a particular line or word just like that. So marker tracks are going to allow you to, quickly navigate within your project. And again, we could say, okay, which marker track is active? So we could just kind of come over here, say, okay, I just want to go to find the mistakes. I want to come over here to song structure. I want to call this one lyrics. And you could now come over and just quickly navigate to different parts of your project as you see fit, just like that. So that's some good uses of marker tracks. All right, so Roland Garrard says very audio polyphonic in Cubase or Wavelab indeed. So. All right, so Michael asks, if an audio event has multiple smaller events behind it, let's say edits, I can barely grab it with the mouse to move it over. The mouse goes into size mode, or the events behind the larger one solution. All right, so let's say I have, I'll just make some of these events smaller here. All right, so let's say, when we're here, one of the things that you could do is, as events are kind of overlapping, so let's say we have two events that are overlapping here. One of the things you could do, let me just... All right, so, if we come here, make sure that your sizing mode is just set to normal sizing, and then you can see if these are set as, let's show it on a different example here. We just drag out some other files. Okay, so let's say these events. All right, so when you have events, all right, so I know what happened. All right, so I'm going to switch one edit mode here, one editing preference to delete overlaps. Okay, and we'll show that in just a second here. So let's say as I drag an event over, and maybe I'll have just a smaller portion of that on top. If you go to the center, you could pick which event is actually going in the bottom center. You could pick which event is going over. So that way you could select different events that might be kind of stacked on top of each other. So you don't necessarily, and if you just click on the particular event, you can make it active just by, selecting the particular event here. So you see that now the underneath event is active. I can make this event active. Once that's the active event, I can resize it. And let's say now I want to go to this event. I can move that over. So I'm not resizing, but where it's overlapping, just click on the bottom center and then you could select different areas. Now, how I started this was an editing preference that some people like to keep things nice and clean, is just you go to your preferences and to choose delete overlaps. So when I take this event and drag it over, what it's done is instead of it overlapping, the event underneath it gets erased. So if I drag this over top of that event is erased so that I don't have any overlaps, but I could still kind of come back here and still have the original file intact by using the event. So sometimes you may want to use delete overlap. Sometimes people are searching for it. Sometimes people don't understand why it's behaving that way. So that could be an option as well. But try just, Michael, clicking on the bottom center, and then you could select which is the active event. You can see Michael Teams is happy to see Gareth on the live stream. All right. See, Mark Rabin just says, I was just thinking the old 441 kind of has been forgotten, and it's such a great mic. Yeah, 441 is a great mic. I have a 421, which I love as well, but, they are like super expensive. It's like you can almost get in a really nice dynamic, a really nice condenser mic for the cost of a new 441. So we see Gareth's going to have to hang out or leave soon. So thanks for joining us, Gareth. Great to see you on. Looking forward to hearing the final mix of Don't Slow Me Down. Let me know when you have it posted somewhere. Okay, so we see from Burnt, this question, I want to remix Tom or Torn, which is a song from the 90s, and I can't get the tempo right. It's 90 BPM, but when importing it, it doesn't line up correctly. I tried hit points, musical mode, import after setting tempo. So, make sure, one, that, it could be a tempo at 90 beats per minute in one sample rate and maybe not another sample rate. But, just like we were doing, see, it was this project. So let's close this one. But you know, like this, I'll show an example track I did like in 91, 92 or so. See if I still have it open here. All right, so this is like a 90s song. We'll just start new. So do new project. And realize that sometimes when you are you know, what was 90 beats per minute as the metronome the drummer used, the track may not be 90 beats a minute. So I'll just come over here. Let me just find. So this is all kind of MIDI drums, but a live performance. And we'll just do a quick tempo map of it. So you have, so we listen to the click. There's no real correlation between them. So if I select this, let's do a quick tempo detection. Now, while this window is open, you know, listen to it, because this places you into the time warp mode. And once you're in the time warp mode, you can kind of switch your mode and it will say, okay, let's do our warp grid. And if you find it as you're listening to it, if like there's maybe one drum fill that was off, what you're able to do at this point after the tempo detection is say, oh, you know, this beat really needs to fall right here. And then at that point, you could make minor tweaks to it and it will recalculate all the tempo changes after that fact. So before you dismiss this window, this puts it into the time warp so that you can make changes and make sure that when you're doing the time warp, that it's set to warp grid mode as opposed to free warp or warp grid with musical events following. So. But I can remember even, you know, going over some early Steely Dan stuff that people in the band swore were perfectly on beat because they used a drum machine that weren't. So even a lot of old drum machines didn't really keep such steady time. You see, Mark Rabin's dog Stella is chill when I'm talking. It also helps put my son to sleep when I read to him before he goes to bed. All right, my chat field jumped on me. All right, Jazzy Lamel says, hey, Greg, I forgot how to embed all my plugin settings into each track so I could export them out with all the processing done. Can you show me? Okay, so let me just set up a quick scenario. We'll jump to a different project. Okay, so let's say we'll open this one up. right, so we have different effects going on. So we listen to. All right, so we see that we're going to be using our send here for the snare. And on the guitars. So if we wanted to export these, let's say to a new project and embed all of the effects, we would go to our file menu. We want to set the left and right locators around the particular events. We're going to go to the left and right locators. So those will be kind of encompassing our parts. We go to export to audio mixdown. We want to choose multiple. So I'll say, okay, let's take, I could do my group channels. Let's do our effects channels. I want to do my instrument track. I want to do all of my audio channels. And where we see effects here, this is the really important thing. If we wanted them all to be dried, we would choose disabled. If we wanted the inserts and channel strip, and that would include the channel EQ to be embedded, but not the send effects, we would choose inserts and strips. If we wanted to include the group routing as well as the send effects, we would choose groups plus sends, and then we could also add the master effects. So when I come over here, we're going to export. This time I'm going to just create a new project, and we'll say export audio mixdown. So this will include all the effects as we mix down. And we could also include our groups, our reverb independently if needed. Just let it export here real quick. Okay, and now here's our new project, and we could hear, so let's come over here to our snare drum and listen to our snare track. So as we just switch this over. So now we have our kick, and all the effects are now and the guitars with their effects. So we could have kind of our stereo mix, the reverb completely isolated and soloed as well. So we just want to hear the reverb. That's all the tracks going through the reverb. So again, just go to your file menu to export, audio mixdown, and the inclusion or exclusion of processing is going to be found in the effects section. So give that a try. I think that will do the trick for you. All right, Tommy C asks, Greg, I know you've answered this many times. Forgive me. I have tons of DJ stuff I sampled and need to make one-shots, long 10-minute sessions. How? So I'm not sure if you need to do like one-shot samples. So if you wanted to just trigger like one-shot samples, let's go to new project. And then if you want to go to an instrument track, you could go to Groove Agent SE. So let's say I just wanted to, let's come over here to my file browser. So if I want to do like one-shot samples, go to projects, and let's go to, I have like maybe a song here. So let's go to Wavelab audio files, let's go to, all right, so if I just come here, I'll just drag a song onto a pad. All right, and now I wanted to come here. So if you wanted to just trigger, so while I hold this down, all right, so let me just, all right, so to make it a one-shot sample in the sampler, you could just come over and clear my throat. So, and again, it's just kind of, so we'll come over here to the sample. And then as we do this, I think we go to the sample itself. We could choose whether it's going to be one shot. Let me just, just blanking on this. Hang on. Okay, here's where you could switch it to one shot, no loop, or until release. So just come over to the sample tab, and then you could set the different one-shot modes. So if you want one-shot, no loop, continuous, or until release. So let me know if that's what you're looking for. You see Gareth has to take off. Thanks for joining us, Gareth. Great to have you on. All right, so we see Stella has a question about dog treats. So I think someone could pass on, maybe Michael Teams could pass on a special dog treat for Stella. Okay, so we see Michael Pierce joining from a chilly UK. Thanks for being online. Clay, like some of my spelling mistakes. Yeah. If I could play keyboards or type, I'd be good with computers. All right, so we have Lawrence Koch checking in from Rhode Island. Glad you can make it today. Okay, so you see from Base Aerocious says I have to get into the habit of working with markers. It could really kind of speed up your project navigation. See, Michael Pierce just saying that he's never used a 441, but the 421, he has a 70s one with a terrible clip. So, yeah, I think with every Sennheiser 421, you have to just buy yourself an extra clip. You know, it's like the worst clip design of all time. So, it's notoriously bad, but I'm sure it's been very profitable for them. I know I bought 2 or 3 clips for mine, and I don't even use it much. All right, so we see Mark Ravens getting snow tonight in Montana. All right, so Scooter B asks, Greg Undo question. Have a Nintendo 3DS here, trying to see how to go and connect it to the audio aux from the Cubase. How do I make Nintendo 3DS audio come out of the Steinberg DAW? So I don't really have any. I'm not that familiar with Nintendo 3DS, so I'm not sure if you're trying to get the audio from the Nintendo into Cubase. So you may have to take an audio, like an analog audio out and feed it in. There's not a lot of audio interfaces. I'm not sure if it has HDMI output and if it's passing the audio from HDMI. If you're getting audio from HDMI, I don't know of any audio interfaces that capture HDMI input, but you could get a box. I know for my music listening room in the living room, I take an HDMI out, and I got a little box on Amazon for $20, $15 that will take an HDMI, and you could extract a SPDIF or coaxial or an 1/8 inch analog output from the HDMI, and you could take those signals into an audio interface and capture it into Cubase. But maybe if you could share what type of audio output, if you're trying to capture the audio from the Nintendo 3DS into Cubase, what physical connection the audio has. If there's an headphone out, you could connect that into an audio interface, or so there's a couple different approaches with that. But if you could give me some more information, just because I'm ignorant on the connections on the Nintendo. Sorry about that. All right. All right, reading through questions. All right, so Clay asks, can you elaborate on the warp modes? Are they different for MIDI data? So, not really. So we'll go ahead and show some warp mode. So let's come over, and I'll just take find just some loops here real quick. Okay, so what warp modes will allow you to do? There's going to be 3 different warp modes. Okay, so there's a warp grid. So let's say right now I don't have this loop set to musical mode. So we could put it in, and I needed to align the musical grid where my metronome is. So let's say our metronome. So I wanted to align the grid to the event. So let's say we don't know what let's say we just have kind of a free recording. So what we could do now is let's take a look at warp mode, just warp grid. What warp grid is going to allow us to do is basically take we're going to keep the audio at the same speed, but what we're going to do is move the measures to match the audio. So I'm going to listen to our beats. So we say, so this is where measure 2 starts. So I move measure 2 to there. All right, measure 3 starts right here at this transient. And measure 4 starts right here. And measure 5 will end there. So now when I turn on my metronome, we can align the grid to the musical event. Now, if we also wanted to, if we had our track in musical mode and our event is in musical mode, as we would change the tempo, the event itself would speed up and slow down. So this way I could say we want all the tempos to be faster, and now or I want them all to be slower. So let's say we'll switch this now to warp grid, and musical events will follow. So let's say now that we have our musical events will follow, but let's say if this track is in linear mode, we can now just kind of stretch particular track. So when we're in that mode, now it's going to be this measure really slow. Now the third mode allows us to, instead of moving the measures to fit the material, is that if we had something that was rhythmically off, we could add what's called warp markers. And you may want to make sure that you have multiple warp markers kind of installed. And we could say this we want to be earlier or later. So we could anchor these particular warp markers and move the timing of this one independently. So if you have to do just a quick rhythmic correction, kind of the warp, free warp is good. So those are some of the different warping options. See, Michael Teams just says his drum machine's tempo is really just a suggestion mostly. Okay, so you see the Heartbreak Time Machine says, I appreciate this export walkthrough so much. All right, so we see Uno Memento says we have 100 likes. It's fantastic. Thank you, everyone. All right, DL White asks, "Hi Greg, I purchased Groove Agent 4 when I had Cubase 8. When I upgraded to 12, my Groove Agent license did not show up in my purchases. Is there a process on my end, or is it a customer service issue?" So I think what you could do is, if you go into go into your e-licenser, and if it's probably going to be on your e-licenser, you could have your the e-licenser kind of query the licenses on it and then put that into your account. So it was probably Groove Agent 4 that was before it had the capability of kind of putting the licenses from your e-licenser into your account. So if you go to your My Steinberg account, just take a look at your licenses, and then you could just say, it could automatically just look at the licenses that are on your device and put that into your account for you. Also, it may be, you may have the 32-bit version of Groove Agent 4 was 32-bit and 64-bit. Make sure that you have the 64-bit version installed. And realize that with Cubase 12, you also get the, the Groove Agent SE version 5. All right, you see Michael Teams going through his rainstorm. All right, so Bruce Bonger just says, "Are you taking on questions?" So sure, just type the questions in, and we have about 47 minutes left, so we should be able to maybe get your question in. I'm just about, I think at this time, maybe about 13 minutes behind. All right, wonderful to see Tiago from Brazil. All right, so we see Nick just saying, "Hi Greg, how are you? Do you know when the store is going to be back up? I tried to go by SpectraLayers and couldn't." So just as today, there's doing a kind of a soft by invitation. Some people have received emails as kind of a test for the online shop. So they're kind of going through the testing procedure. So they're doing a kind of a limited promotion test to see if the mechanics are working. It seems to be working pretty well. So I would expect it, probably soon. So. All right, so we see Bruce Mager asks, I forget what the name is, but can you tell me if the chord detection has been updated? So, it was just brought in version 12, so it's still in version 12. I've always had some really good luck with it, so I'll just kind of show an example here. So it's still within the current version that it was released in. So, but let's say if I want to take, so if I drag this to the chord track, and there's another way where you could get some additional options for kind of interpretation. So if you select the track, go to that, may not be as obvious, go to your project menu and you'll see chord track and you'll see create chord events. And sometimes with MIDI information, they could be it could have some different interpretive flags as well, but it hasn't been updated since we're still in the same kind of generation. Okay, so you see Best Green Jesus sharing some info on the Nintendo DS. So he says just get a 3.5 millimeter to 2/4 inch mono splitter and connect it to the audio interface. Okay, so we see from time he says, no groove agent, 10-minute file with lots of samples I can export separately, thanks. Okay, so if you have, sorry for misunderstanding, but let's say we do new project. Come here, let's, I'll just put a bunch of events on one particular track. Okay, so if we needed to export all of these separately, just make sure it says a 10-minute file with lots of samples I can export separately. So if you needed like a bunch of files here and you needed to export these as separate events, you could go to File menu. You'll see Export, and then you could say, let's export selected tracks. We could just reference, or we could copy the particular audio files, and then you could export each of the events separately. So we'll give it a name. And then you could just simply import that. So I think we import track archive. Let's see if it shows up there. So yeah, just try going to export selected events, and we do as separate events. And then, yeah, so let me know if that works for you. All right, great to see Best Green Jesus on. Thanks for the help with the Nintendo DS. Michael Pierce says, in some sources, warp markers are a lifesaver. Well, time saver at least. So. Okay, reading through comments here. All right, so we see from Rick BM. Hi, Greg. Greetings from Brazil. Earlier today, you said that the ins can be coupled / decoupled from the tracks. I got confused. Can you show how? All right, so if we have an input track, so let's say we have an input track here, and we'll just put a test tone generator on it. Okay, so I have this test tone generator, but we're not going to see it listed anywhere on our project. So we have the input, the input that's been defined in software that's probably routed to a physical connection on our in our VST input settings and our audio connections. So we could see the input coming in directly here. When we go to add an audio track, we'll add a stereo audio track. Realize that we're not going to see that input defined until we set this as, let's say, we'll see our audio input here is MR816.6. So as soon as this track has the MR816.6 input, then we can see, so right now it's decoupled because this input isn't routed to any track. As soon as that input is routed to a track, so let's say when I come here, it's not routed to a track, so we see that being decoupled. When this connection is made to the track, then that's when it can be coupled together. So let me know if that makes sense. So we can see that, you know, at this point we have all of the same, and we could attenuate the gain if needed. So let me know if that's what I was confused you about. All right, so we see from Clay. Greg, what are your thoughts on libraries management for a system where there are many contact, VSTIs, HALion instruments, etc.? If you want to type a sound from all installed stuff, how find it? You know, so we have it as part of the VST3 specification. So, you know, and that's a good way to do it. Realize that not all programs run VST3 plugins, so I understand the need for the manufacturers maybe to have their own proprietary system that is known. You know, and the problem is if you go with one company, you know, it's like, let's say you go with company X and they come up with a really slick solution, and then company X goes out of business and then it's never updated. I've seen that a number, you know, happen at least 20 times over the years of different standards that work. So, but you could, you know, instruments like Contact could automatically work with the VST3 presets, and that would be a good place to do it because we could do it at the plugin level in a cross-platform manner. So I think it'd be great if, you know, all the companies took advantage of the capabilities that were already offered in plugin formats. It would solve a lot of their problems in the long run. See, Michael Pierce says, I must admit, I do get confused from time to time on HALion's patch selection. I'm always hunting for the big screen with a pretty library picture. So if you have, you know, like when you come over to HALion, so let's go ahead and just load up an instrument track. So let's do just a full HALion 7. All right, so we'll come over here. Let's just go to like a single instrument, double click, and then at this point you could always see it just on the right hand side. And you know, you can kind of turn, you know, one of the great things with HALion is you could have each of these windows kind of, you know, opened up as, you know, as needed. So if you wanted to come over here, you could have, you know, different window sets, and once you're inside of, let's say we load this up, you know, you could have different types of layouts for, you know, different sources. So if you want to see, you know, different screen sets, or if you just wanted to go home, here you could, you know, see all sorts of different options that are available. But by default, if you just click on single or multi, you'll have all of the options available for you. Okay. You just see Clay just saying gigasampler, talking about different samples. So brings back a lot of fond memories. So. All right, so let me go to some of the questions that were mailed in. Thanks for everyone sending your questions. Let's get to some of those. We are near the end of on-board questions. All right. All right. So a question: how to add more colors to the color palette? Okay, so when we're looking at colors, if you go to your project menu to project setup, or you'll see project color setup, sorry, right here. We could just come over here. So say we see our 16 colors, and you could give them names if you wanted to. But there's also, when we go to presets, right now we have 16 basic colors with one color tint. We could switch this to 32 colors. You could double your colors just like that. And we could have 4 color tints. So as we hit apply and we go to add colors, you could add a number of different colors and have more color options available for you to choose from. All right, we had a question mailed in. I have a question regarding the MIDI remote. Let's say I have a Chord Nano control with 8 channels, and I've organized these 8 physical channels in mixer bank zones, which I could then switch in groups of 8 to represent tracks 1 through 8, 9 through 16, etc. The order in which the tracks appear on the MIDI remote corresponds to the order in which the active tracks appear on the project window. My question is now, is there a way to tell the MIDI remote to reflect the order of the tracks in the mix window instead? Any solution for this? As always, thank you in advance for your support. So, you know, generally, I think that if we added, you know, let's say 31 audio tracks, and we, at this point, let's say if we've hidden a number of different tracks, let's say roughly like every other track, that when we go into the chord pads, let's go to the MIDI remote rather, sorry, and we switch this to our mixer, that these will, and I move, let me just open this up so we could see it reflected as well. And I move faders 1. So I move fader 2, that may be fader 1 here. So do this, and then where we have kind of hidden faders, like, so let's say we have this channel is hidden. So let's say audio 3 is hidden, sorry. that when I move my third fader, it's still, that track is still visible, but that track is still in the project, even though it's hidden. There, it's going to automatically follow the tracks that are in the project and not just what is visible. I think the only controller that I'm familiar with, and maybe others do it, I haven't worked with a lot of controllers that will kind of update the settings based on the current track visibility that had an option. The one that I know of that does it is the Nuage controller. That was really slick in being able to automatically do that as an option. But I think when using the Nano control, it's going to have kind of a one-to-one relationship with the existing tracks and doesn't take into account, just because it's hidden doesn't mean that the event isn't happening or sounding audio. Okay, so we see question. I recently bought a Dangerous Music D-Box, planning to do analog summing. My audio interface is a UAD version 6 and UAD Twin X Cubase 12 Pro. I have two questions. First question, when I go to Cubase Studio Setup under Audio System, I see Universal Audio Thunderbolt. The I/O shows all the inputs and outputs as Universal Audio Thunderbolt 1, Universal Audio Thunderbolt 2, Universal Audio Thunderbolt 3, etc. I have seen videos where it actually shows the name given to the given by the UAD console, such as Apollo, X6 Mic 1, or SPDIF, or Line 2. I know I can rename them, but is there a way to see the names auto-populate as being shown at the UAD I/O? So, if to be automatically populated, that extracts the names from the particular driver. So it's kind of, we could change the input and output names just by going into your studio. As you mentioned, if we go to your audio connections, you can just type in whatever name you want for a particular device. But the names are kind of auto-populated directly from the driver itself. So that's what's determining that. And sometimes I've seen driver names be different on Mac and Windows. So you may be seeing the names populated on one platform versus another platform. Okay. Okay. So, in second question, I think is under Cubase Studio audio connection outputs, I created 4 stereo outputs for my stems to be sent to external analog summing. Is that correct? Or I have to create external effects. My idea is to send all my drums into a group called drums and have that group, instead of sending to the stereo out, I would like to send it to output 1 and 2, my UAD. X6, do the same with the other groups, and then come back into Cubase to a channel I can call Sum Mix and print to Cubase. I hope I'm not too confusing. Can you please help me with the setup? I'll be watching the next Club Cubase. Thanks. This is from Lewis. So if you have some people, if you're just kind of feeding it out, you're feeding your drums, your guitars, your vocals to different outputs for processing. At that point, you could bring it in just doing a typical analog patch. So you don't have to use external effects. You do have the option of using external effects. And the benefit of using an external effects combination is that it could do the delay compensation for you. So if you're combining something that's going out to the summing mixer and then bringing it back in with tracks that never left the computer, those tracks may be out of time slightly. So the benefit of using an external effects integration is that it could do the delay compensation for you. So some people may not want their drums, 10 milliseconds out of time with the rest of the track because they chose to do a summing. So that would be the benefit of that. All right, so we see a question that was mailed in. Is there a quick and easy way to switch from a high to a low buffer size in Cubase without having to reset the control room because of missing audio connections? I have a Scarlett Focusrite 18i20. The thing is, I use my Roland TD-20 drums to trigger Groove Agent and other VST drums and play along with audio to record it. This only works with low latency buffer 32, but after recording, I need a higher buffer size to work on the result. When I switch to higher buffer size, every time I need to select audio connections again. Is there a way to prevent this, or do I just have to live with it? So, you don't have to go into your audio connections to reset the buffer size. When tracking drums, if you have plugins that are causing the high latency. So if you're kind of in a project and you have a lot of plugins that have latency, and you could determine that by looking at the mix console. So let's say if we're in the mix console, you could actually see, you could, open up channel latency here. And as you add plugins, you realize that some plugins, every time that you add it as an insert, could impose latency. So if we go to, let's say, multiband compressor, we can see that one instance, this channel has 113 milliseconds. That could throw off your drum performance. If we add another multiband compressor, we've now doubled that. So if we've used kind of latent plugins across our path, and that's what is causing the latency not to work. And here we can see what each plugin and the latency that's being imposed. So if it's kind of plugins that are causing the latency, all you would have to do is come over here, and there's a constrained delay compensation in the lower left-hand corner. And what this will do is, as you're tracking, that will bypass those particular plugins that are causing the latency. And then you can just simply, at that point, turn it off when you're playing back. So if the latency challenges are that, the plugins themselves are that is the latency that's inhibiting the performance, you can just come over here and turn on a constrained delay compensation. Many audio interfaces may have a little mixer applet that you could open. But, if you come here, just have your device set up and go to control panel. Once we get to the control panel, we're actually kind of going into the audio interface settings for that particular device itself. So once we go to the control panel, we're kind of in the software for your audio interface and outside of Cubase. So there may be a quicker way to do that through a little mixer applet, or, a little program like you would run from up here that's going to be kind of installed. So, but to physically change the latency, you would need to do it from the control panel or from a control panel for the audio interface, which may be outside of Cubase. Okay, so we see last week I already sent you a question about SpectraLayers. It's a new question. I use it often inside of Cubase to unmix songs in order to work with separate parts like drums, keys, bass, vocals, etc. My current workflow is that I drag every separate part, drums, etc., after unmixing into the project I was working on. If there's a quicker way to get all the unmixed stems or parts in one move inside the project, please let me know what I should do to speed up the process. So if you do have a particular, to do after things have been separated, right, that they're going to be in stems, in as different layers. So let me just see if I may have one project that's already kind of split up. Okay, so when we have our stems, and realize that the tricky thing is as we do this and we drag, and so let's say we have so I'm going to look at this, and this is one I've kind of pre-unmixed. So realize that now we play this particular file, and that's with everything. Once we drag this out, not only are we, not only do we do this, we're updated, we drag. So you have to, as far as I know, you have to drag the files independently. And as we do this, this file is automatically extracted and this file is changed so that this file doesn't have vocals. So now if let's take this, I'll just undo that. Let's grab our vocal file here, or vocal layer. So as we do this, this file is changed as well. So, so now as we kind of play back the different elements, so as you drag it in, the other files have to be updated to reflect the changes so that you don't hear the vocals on top of the vocals themselves. So they are dragged in one at a time. I think it's a pretty small price to pay for the amazing capabilities of doing it, but there isn't a way to kind of unmix it because it's doing it through an ARA2 interface to achieve the functions. All right. See if there's. All right, so we see, hi Greg, I don't know if you're the right person to reach out. I hope you can forward it to the right person. Ever since my Sonoma update, Nuendo graphics are not loading until I move the mouse over. See attached video. I tried running with and without Rosetta, nothing changed. I'm running Nuendo 1207 and Sonoma 14.0 on Mac. Pro M1 Max, thank you for everything. So currently, I believe it is an Apple issue that is causing this. There are people that have downloaded the beta preview of 14.1, and that seems to resolve it. I know that the Steinberg engineers were in touch with Apple, and I think it is going to be on Apple's side to resolve it. So, but check out the public beta of Sonoma for the next version. All right, and I think that's all for the questions that were mailed in. I think we answered the other ones. Let me jump back to our live questions. All right, so you see Gerald Ely's got an email to test for the store. That's great. All right, so we have Thomas joining late, so glad you can make it today. All right, so Thomas asks, I just bought a used CI2 for an old computer for lightweight audio work. Is there a way for me to press play on my main computer and have both play at the same time? That would be a bonus. So there's probably no way of synchronizing the two computers. I know some of the CI interfaces had transport. What I've seen some people do, we had to set up with Donny Osmond. It was kind of a clever thing. Like, he had a wired USB keyboard, and he had two systems that were kind of running. And we just got a little USB-Y cable and connected and what they wanted to do is hit the space bar and to start the show, and have a backup computer in case something went wrong. So we just basically did a Y USB cable out of his computer and just hit play that way. So maybe if you're doing a type of Y cable, you might be able to get it to work. But I haven't played with the CI in at least 15 years. All right, wonderful to see Neil Conway from Oregon. Thanks for joining us today. And if you're late, you have to hit the like button. So, all right. So Michael Pierce asks, is there a way to set a threshold for constrained delay compensation? Example: ignore anything under 1 millisecond. So if you go to your preferences, and I believe it's under VST, we'll see delay compensation threshold for recording. So it's set to 20 milliseconds by default, but you could adjust it there. So once again, go to your preferences, to VST, and then you'll see your delay compensation threshold setting. So it's a user adjustable. So we see from Khalil, if I ever want to become a Nuendo/Cubase instructor, how do I sign on doing that? So there is a program called a Steinberg Certified Trainer. So if you go to steinberg.net, you could search for that. I guess I should sign up for it. I never did sign up for it, so maybe I could qualify. But yeah, so you could become a Steinberg Certified Trainer that way. So, and it's kind of done through the Hamburg office. All right, so we see Michael Pierce just says, legend. I completely missed that revelation of the week. Thank you. I guess on the delay compensation threshold preference. All right, so I think we are just out of questions. We'll see if there's any more questions that come up. Once again, so a week from today, it's going to be, we'll have a special Halloween episode. We won't do any special Halloween themed things, but we'll be doing our last end of the month live stream, which means we do usually a 2-hour live stream, and then we'll have a 2-hour Zoom social meetup. We'll provide the link in the meeting, and we will have a special guest, Tim Hinckley. I've known Tim 20 plus years, just a journeyman in the music industry. He's been active for 55 plus years. Some of the people he's worked with, my cat just opened my door and wants to get fed. He's worked with Whitesnake, Thin Lizzy, The Who, Rolling Stones, George Harrison, Alvin Lee, just kind of a who's who of musicians. Has played with and friends with everyone from that whole era. Just can tell you amazing insights, and he's been a Cubase user since 1989-ish. So he's just a wonderful resource. So everyone, look forward to everyone getting to meet Tim and ask him questions and share some of his insights. So let's see if there's any more. So, see, Michael Pierce says, okay, so dress up code for next week. So if you want to wear Halloween costumes for the live stream, you could do it. I probably won't wear a Halloween costume, but if you want it for the Zoom social meetup, we'll encourage Halloween costumes. So I know Halloween isn't as big a deal everywhere as it is in the United States. I think in Germany it's starting to get a little more traction. because I've been in Germany and HALion a couple times for meetings. All right, so we'll see if there's any more quick questions that come. Anyway, appreciate everyone spending part of your morning, afternoon, evening learning more about Steinberg products. Hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick. We usually do these on Tuesdays and Fridays starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, which I believe is 7 p.m. Central European Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time, and 3 a.m. in Brisbane, Australia time. So for Ash Rebelhen Studios, who's kind enough to join us from Australia. So, but look forward to seeing everyone back on Friday's live stream. We want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and I'm just really grateful that everyone has, I hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick, and grateful for being able to help people be able to use their Cubase a little faster and a little better. So we see Sable Winters as Tim Hinckley, singer-songwriter and keyboard player. So yes, that's him. So he's kind of a legendary B3 player, kind of a... All right, so I guess with that, we'll see if I'll give it another 10 seconds or so, see if there's any more questions that come in. If not, we will wrap up a couple minutes early. All right, so with that, it looks like we're out of questions. Thank you so much, and we will see everyone back on Friday. Everyone take care, and we'll see you Friday. Stay safe and healthy.